Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land in which we are based, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and extend that respect to the elders past and present.
Hi everyone, welcome to the third EWB UNSW Inspire podcast of 2021. My name is Muskan and I'm the Projects Director for EWB UNSW.
My name is John and I'm one of the project coordinators.
Joining us today is Dr. Andrew Dansie, who is a Senior Lecturer in Humanitarian Engineering at UNSW. Would you like to introduce yourself and what you do?
Hi Muskan. Hi John. Yes, thank you very much for having me. As you said, I'm a Senior Lecturer in Humanitarian Engineering here at UNSW in the School of Civil and Environmental Engineering. I joined UNSW in 2019 in this role, having spent time working overseas in the international development sector with the United Nations. I'm really excited to be in this new position. It's the first time a position has humanitarian engineer in its title at the university, to work with both the research community and the students in the education capacity in humanitarian engineering. And I think one thing that's important to note is that while this position is the first one in its title, there's a lot of existing and excellent humanitarian work being done across the university by academics and students that do not have that name in their title. But I think it's a reflection of the interest in this area and the opportunity to grow.
That sounds good. And speaking of humanitarian engineering, how would you describe it to someone who has never heard of it before?
That's a really good question. Humanitarian engineering works with disadvantaged people and or communities. They tend to be in low and middle income countries, but also we do work in Australia as well, especially in remote and regional communities. The humanitarian aspects there, the provision of basic needs are similar in Australia as they are in overseas. And the key thing about the humanitarian engineering part is that it is a sustainable and an appropriate solution. So working with the communities and the recipients to identify what's needed and then work with them to develop a solution that works for them.
What made you interested in humanitarian engineering and how did you incorporate this with your experience in the water sector?
I graduated back in South Australia, did an undergraduate degree at Flinders University and postgraduate at the University of Adelaide, and then went off to work in the private sector in Western Australia. I enjoyed the work over there in the consulting sector very much, but I felt like there was something that I wanted to do perhaps a bit more in the fields of sustainability and international development, and using my water expertise from my degree and my private sector work. I was lucky enough to get a job working for the United Nations University, which is the UN think tank on water, looking at water resources management globally. So I was very fortunate to be able to travel to lots of parts of the world and look at different water problems and different water solutions in whole different contexts, ranging from aquifers to lakes to rivers to the coastal zone as well. So both freshwater and marine.
That sounds really cool. Just going from science into that humanitarian engineering side of things. So last year in your podcast with Hugo, you mentioned that humanitarian engineering also encompasses the broader environmental context. Why do you think it's important to consider environmental constraints when it comes to humanitarian engineering?
That is an excellent question. And I think that comes back to the humanitarian engineering solutions needing to be sustainable and appropriate. The solutions that we are working with need to last long after the donor country or the donor organization have left, and needs to work within the local environment and with the owners of that land and that resource. The population that we have on the planet today, we're approaching 8 billion people. At the end of World War II, we were roughly around 2 billion people. So in the last 80 years, we've almost quadrupled the number of people on the planet. So any solutions we come up with have to be aware of the finite resources that we have and have to not make the pressures on the environment worse. So that's a very important thing in humanitarian engineering, but environmentally more broadly as well, for all kinds of things we do on this planet.
What do you believe are some of the biggest challenges in the field of humanitarian engineering and the ability to work remotely on these challenges?
I think some of the biggest challenges are that population pressure. We have to try and do more with less. There's more people on the planet than there were. And with the economic hardships that are occurring all around the world due to the recent COVID disruption, that we've also seen decreases in the international aid budget and the money needed to help those that are least fortunate on the planet. So we need to do more with less financially as well, and that is a really big challenge that we face.
Yeah, would you say with the COVID sort of like border restriction, is it sort of like, is COVID making it harder to reach out to communities?
Yes and no, and apologies, Muskan, I forgot the second part of your question there about working remotely, which ties in, John, to what you just said then as well. Because we can't travel now, that used to be a big part of the humanitarian sector, was to go overseas, and there still are important parts of the humanitarian sector doing that. REDAR Australia being one, of course, deploying professionals overseas in response to disasters, but also in response to forced migration, refugee camp management, and other important work. So those travels are still occurring. People like myself that work in international development are no longer able to travel, and we're seeing, I suppose, pros and cons of that. Instead of people just flying in and talking about it and meeting and leaving again, we're having to really work with those existing in-country partners that we have, and put everything in their hands and work with them remotely. And this works really well. We've got some partners we're working with in Kenya and Uganda, looking at SDG 6 and provision of safe drinking water, and other partners we've got in the Solomon Islands looking at air quality and the impacts on health, especially in poor and disadvantaged income communities and individual households, and WhatsApp and those kind of technologies are available overseas. And just having video calls out in the field, if there's problems with equipment, or having a kind of meeting between stakeholders, that's working really well. So there's definitely challenges. It's not as good, and you can't, if those relationships didn't exist already, you couldn't just jump in and say, let's have a WhatsApp call with strangers. But the ongoing delivery of existing projects is continuing quite well, I suppose, in spite of all the difficulties.
I'd say that's pretty good. I'd say like in a sense, sort of like COVID also like allow sort of different sort of like people in different countries to sort of like unite together on like a online platform and sort of like facilitate that sort of like working environment. So I mean, like I guess like coming out of COVID, so there's probably going to be more like flexible sort of like working, like flexible way to sort of like collaborate between different people, whether it be like in person or online. Yeah,
I think so. I think it's going to be much more acceptable to put into, say, proposals to international donors, and they could be multilateral funding agencies or bilateral aid or NGOs. But having remote workshops as well as face-to-face workshops, I think it'll be much more acceptable. People are much more aware or much more able to perform effectively in this kind of work environment as well. So I think, trying to take the good things that we can from this kind of work environment. But we also have to remember as well that many people don't have the luxuries that we have to be able to lock ourselves away and work from home in our safe environments, and make sure that we don't then exclude those that don't have access to such facilities, and make sure their voices are still heard as well. So that's really important too.
Yeah, I think those are really good points in terms of like how we sort of like look at the challenges in the field of humanitarian engineering. So right now we're kind of dive into more of your academic / industry experience in the water and development sector. So with your years of involvement in the water sector, like how did you find your way or realize that this was a field that really spoke to you and started getting involved in it?
I think I've always been, I was very fortunate to grow up in regional South Australia, having access to a lot of nature, and I think I really that impacted me a lot, having that kind of childhood and being fortunate enough to have that experience. And I always enjoyed the aquatic side of things. So water I was always drawn to. Being in Australia, water was obviously not a challenging field to get into. There's a lot of need for water in Australia. There's a lot of demand, and graduating when I did back in 2005, there was a lot of work over in the West as well to be had. So it was quite easy to get into the bottom rung of the ladder and start up over there in the private sector. And globally, water is such an important commodity. It's both a necessity for life. We need it for industrialization and industrial processes. We need it to grow our food. We need it to do all kinds of things in society. So water is something that's intertwined through every aspect of the Sustainable Development Goals, for example. It's intertwined with every single country's national policies and priorities on how they're going to manage their resources. Water is very central to that. And just looking at the SDGs themselves, I think it's about 785 million people don't have access to a basic water provision at the moment. 2 billion people don't have access to sanitation on the planet. And more than that, don't have access to adequate hand washing facilities, which is, as we know, is so important for the prevention of disease and viruses, including COVID. So unfortunately, there's not going to be any work drying up for water professionals in my lifetime, at least. It's always going to be something we have to manage and work together to try and use sustainably. And I think the intersections of water as well, with all kinds of environmental and social needs, means that there's roles for engineers and scientists and social scientists and artists and all kinds of professions to get involved and work in the water sector. So I find it a really interesting space to work.
I guess the follow-up question would be, what's the most rewarding part about what you do?
That's a very good question. There's a few. I'm really enjoying coming from 8 years in the United Nations and working in the field and on the ground and in management. Now being in a university and working with students and just seeing the passion and enthusiasm and the new ideas that they have, and especially in the project-based course that we have on offer, the Humanitarian Engineering projects at UNSW, is really inspiring. It's really good to work with that next generation of professionals coming through. Engineers have really, really useful skills to both manage water, but more broadly help the world work towards achieving the targets under the Sustainable Development Goals and whatever the next iteration will be, as you try to improve the lives and livelihoods of those that are disadvantaged. So working with the students is something I find really rewarding. But then also rewarding is working with the overseas partners as well. When you meet these people, when you go over there and you work there, you are made to feel so welcome. You really have a lot of trust put into you to take the information that you've been given and work with them to develop a solution and do good with that. So I find that very rewarding as well.
Yeah, I guess I can see how sort of like to solve sort of like to tackle the challenges with like the water sector. So we need sort of like there's going to be like all kinds of stakeholders that's going to be involved in it, like scientists, like even students as well, contributing to it, and then like the academic side of things as well. Yeah, I guess that's pretty cool. Yeah, so I think next question is sort of, given experience as a project director, sort of with the transboundary management of freshwater and coastal resources, could you expand on what this entails and sort of its purpose?
Yeah, that was a very interesting project. That when I was in the United Nations University and I was director of that project, looking at the last 20 years of transboundary water projects invested in by the GEF, which is the Global Environment Facility. The GEF came out of the Rio Convention in 1991 and was set up to tackle global environmental problems, as the name suggests. It has their own donor countries that give it money, and it's the largest funder of environmental projects in the world. So this project, in its almost 20 years when I was doing that work, had spent almost $7 billion on transboundary projects around the world. And as project director, I was fortunate enough to be able to bring together teams of 20 experts in 5 different water areas. They were groundwater, lakes, rivers, the coastal zone, and the open ocean, and look at that 20 years, almost 20 years then, and now over 20 years of investment, and put out the science and the learnings that had been made all around the world, and try and inform the next tranche, the next X amount of $1 billion that were going to be prioritized towards these water problems. And so this project finalized in 2012. And back then we were seeing some of the key issues, that we were very aware of today. some the scientists were aware of before the general public. Other ones were well known, such as sea level rise. But things like microplastic pollution and plastic loading in rivers was identified way back then as something that was becoming an emerging problem. We're now very, very aware of that, of course. So working with scientists in these areas and bringing together the experience was a really wonderful experience to be able to do that. And that was being done in time for 2011, which was the Rio +20 conference, where the world got together in Brazil and looked at what happened in the 20 years since the Rio Earth Summit in 1991. So a really big global project. It was really interesting and really great to work with so many people. And those 5 teams of 20, so those 100 people, came from all over the world. And that was both natural scientists and social scientists. So it was really great to have all these different people pull apart the projects and see how to best manage water, both across boundaries, but also the interconnectivity of water between, say, surface water and groundwater, or terrestrial water and marine waters. It was really, really interesting.
Yeah, I guess like, so how would you say, so like since transboundary water resource management sort of spans across sort of like countries, right? And what did you say are the benefits? Like how would it benefit everyone in terms of, I guess there's like the environmental aspect and there's a social aspect where like people getting like shared benefits.
Yeah. No, so for example, if my country was upstream and your country was downstream, you'd have to be very interested in what I was doing upstream, and making sure that I wasn't polluting the waterway, that I wasn't taking out too much, that I wasn't diverting it, and making sure that the water that then comes into your country via the international border is of adequate quality and quantity for you to manage your economy and your ecosystems and do the things that you want to do as well. As engineers and as a species, you know, we're incredibly industrious at being able to build very large things. Hydropower dams being one example. So if I had a decision or desire to build a large dam upstream, that would have big impacts downstream, and making sure that that water is managed across the boundary between countries is really important. These boundaries, of course, being largely irrelevant with regards to how the water flows and the basins themselves.
Yep. Yeah, I guess like this sort of sums up a bit of like how it actually seems like between different countries, whether it's like upstream, downstream. And I guess next question would be, what would you say are some of the biggest concerns our world and the water sector face today? And how do these challenges vary across different countries across the globe?
Wow, big question, that one. But I think, yeah, it comes back to, I touched on it just before, the quantity and quality of water and its sustainable use. With the changing climate that we have due to the anthropogenic forcing of our carbon emissions, general rule is wetter places will get wetter, drier places will get drier. You know, that's very general, that's not everywhere, but we're going to have either too much water or not enough water compared to what we're normally, you know, what we've built our cities and our coastal infrastructure around, the croplands that we've designated, and of course the ecosystems that have evolved there as well. There's going to be all kinds of pressures that come. So managing that resource sustainably is something that's going to be a big challenge. And again, it has to be doing more with less. We've got both the increasing population of humans itself that is placing additional pressure on the water resource. But then we also have, as we do lift people out of poverty and we do bring more people up from into the middle class, and you know, they have, you know, more meat in their diets, more dairy, you know, more energy intensive ways of living and more resource heavy consumption lifestyles, as we do here in Australia. That's going to place additional resources as well. So how can we be more efficient with using our water, and more broadly environmentally, is going to be a big challenge that we face. And every country is going to have a different set of priorities and challenges. How these operate and intersect is something that I'm also working on as well, and looking at the water, energy, food nexus is a space where, if you are prioritizing water, making sure that we're managing water but not making things worse for, say, the energy or the food sector, is something that you can look at, and taking this nexus approach and trying not to move the problem elsewhere is something that needs to be considered as well. And again, so I think that's why it's so important to work with both the local partners in the country, but also to work across professions as well, and don't just solve things as engineers, but have the humanitarian approach of working collaboratively and working with those that already have the knowledge on the ground to make sure that our solutions are appropriate and sustainable is key.
Yeah, I think it's really good that you highlight the challenges sort of like it concerns with sort of like the demand from population and also from the different sort of like different classes of people have different sort of like resource consumption. And I guess like what you talked about before, the transboundary water resource management, I guess that sort of allows us to see that to tackle the challenges in the water sector, it's not really just tackling the issue in the country, but it could also be cross-boundary. So like all countries working together towards solving, like tackling this issue.
Yeah, that's it. And I think science is a language that can be the common language that countries use to share that resource.
I guess so we right now, as more like a career related advice, so do you have any advice for any students or passionate individuals that want to pursue a similar path?
Yes, I think there's many different ways to get into this field. There's the way that I came, where it's go and get experience in industry first, and then move across. That's a very accepted and traditional pathway as well. But it's not the only way that things have to be done. There's now jobs looking for the humanitarian engineering aspects of the degree and the expertise that's being asked for. There's the NGO sector, and there's the deployment overseas as well. Engineers Without Borders provides a tremendous resource and opportunity for students to get a taste when they're doing their degrees there and get some ideas as well. And I think doing things such as your honours project, if you're doing an undergraduate degree, an honours project in this space could be a great way to see how you enjoy it and also make some connections out there in the real world with in-country partners too. And I suppose, yeah, volunteering, going to conferences, speaking to people is some really good, really sound advice.
And for sort of like graduate students stepping into the professional industry, like how would you say are some of the ways that they could still get involved in like humanitarian engineering while working as a professional engineer?
No, I think that's something that you guys are teaching me. I've already had students that have graduated from their undergraduate engineering degree at UNSW reach out to me, and they're working in the private sector as graduate engineers, and they're leading the young professional network or something like that, and they're bringing in the humanitarian engineering experts and professionals to speak to them about it. I think incoming generation, I'm not sure what the right term is, but the people that are now making that first step into the professional world, also tell your employers what you want and tell them what is important to you. I think you are much more global in your thinking, much more perhaps concerned about inequality, and much more concerned about the environment and making sure that's managed sustainably for you and for the future generations to come. So I think not being shy to speak to the middle and upper management about what's important to you, and together you have a voice. And things such as Engineers Australia, Engineers Without Borders, those kind of platforms are great ways to meet like-minded people as well.
Thank you for sort of providing insights into sort of like how students can sort of pursue going to like sort of like a path into like the water and development sector, and also sort of like how they could sort of be involved in humanitarian engineering. So right now we're just going to like go into touching more about the UNSW humanitarian engineering courses offerings.
So UNSW offers a range of humanitarian related courses, and you're actually the lecturer for fundamentals of humanitarian engineering. So I wanted to ask, what other humanitarian engineering courses can students take, and how does the humanitarian engineering minor work at UNSW?
Yes, we're really excited to finally have a humanitarian engineering minor on offer at UNSW, and this is for engineering students in any school at the university. And there's a minor in humanitarian engineering for those doing an engineering degree, and then there's also a minor in humanitarian science and technology for those in the School of Chemical Engineering that are undertaking a Bachelor of Science and Technology. That tends to be more food and nutrition focused. So no matter what degree you're doing at UNSW, you have the opportunity to complete a minor as part of that degree. In order to complete a minor, you have to have completed 24 units of approved courses. One of those being the one that you mentioned, the fundamentals of humanitarian engineering. Another one is Eng 4102, which is the Humanitarian Engineering Projects course, where you actually get to have some hands-on time in the maker spaces or online working to build a solution. But importantly, not just build the solution, but then how will it actually be implemented in country. And back when travel was allowed, we had students from that course then go to Uganda and work with an in-country NGO, an Australian partner, the Ugandan Australian Love Mercy Foundation, to actually take what they'd been doing and then go and look at how it could be implemented in country. Was really exciting. We're really excited to offer a new course. This year is the first time it's been offered, called ENG 4103, which is the International Humanitarian Response course. And that's offered in partnership with Redar Australia. So students will complete 9 weeks of the course here at UNSW and 1 week of the course down at Mount Macedon, Redar headquarters in Victoria, and complete their 1 week Essentials of Humanitarian Practice training and then be accredited for that. That's the first course that you can do to then be able to be sent overseas, deployed in the humanitarian engineering field. Other courses are Arts 2755, which is the Global Development in Practice, and having a course offered from the Faculty of Art, Design and Architecture is really exciting to be able to get engineers in with those development study students and look at things from a different angle, not just look at it from a technical viewpoint, but look at it from perhaps more of a people angle and taking into the social and cultural contexts to a much deeper level than perhaps they have in their engineering degree to date. There's then other courses that the students can take. You can see them on the unsw.to/he website. Students can then choose a course that's more targeted to perhaps their interests in, say, food and nutrition, or renewable energies, or water, or sustainable development. You can pick a different course there to tailor your minor to your interests.
Yep, that sounds really interesting. And can these be taken as electives or gen eds, or does it have to be in the minor?
No, they can be taken as gen eds or professional electives as well. And so I'm happy for any students that are interested to reach out to me. We also have a humanitarian engineering champion in each school of the faculty who are aware of the minor and how it fits in exactly to their degrees as well. So if you can't fit every course for the minor into your degree, you may just want to do one or two. And we also have, of course, the honours thesis as well, where you can do your honours thesis as a humanitarian thesis, so humanitarian engineering thesis. That can also contribute to the minor in lieu of ENG 4102 if you did not have enough space for that. But yeah, reach out to me or the HE champs in your school, and then we can help guide you through the process.
And you mentioned ENG 4102 before, International Humanitarian Response. What do you think it means for engineers to be involved in humanitarian response at the global level?
I think for the recipients and for the people in need, having engineers there, having an accredited professional over there that might be working in water or structures or waste means that the work that's being done is being done to an appropriate standard and to an appropriate quality that is needed in these cases. For the engineers themselves, I think being able to contribute to these problems and help those less fortunate is really important. And Redar Australia gives that opportunity for people to go overseas and be deployed. And their employers in Australia and their families and friends also help make that work as well by allowing them to go overseas and give them that opportunity. Sometimes family members can go with it, depends on where the location is. I think having engineers as part of humanitarian efforts, be it in an emergency situation to a natural disaster, or as part of ongoing chronic development needs, such as in poor and disadvantaged communities or in refugee camp situations. Having engineers there means that you've got people that have the technical ability to improve the lives and the surroundings of those that need it most.
Yep, I think that's really interesting, because before coming into university, I always thought with response services, it would just be people working on the response, but there wouldn't be technical issues involved with that. So it's really interesting to see the broader perspective of what goes into the management and preparation of these events.
That's it. And you think about if everything got taken away, and how long you would last without proper shelter and then proper food and water, access to health and medical equipment, engineers play a role in providing all of those needs.
Yep. And lastly, what do you wish to inspire within students, and what do you believe they can gain from taking these humanitarian engineering courses at uni?
I think these courses are a great opportunity for those that want to do something with those less fortunate. They give you the taste and the tools to be able to perhaps apply your engineering skills in resource scarce and alien situations, and perhaps what you haven't been familiar with to date. The new Colombo Plan Mobility Grants funded by the Australian government are a great way for us to get our students overseas and also work in other countries as well. EWB and also UNSW itself is doing great work in regional Australia as well. And that's not something that I'm working with myself, but there's also those opportunities to do stuff in Australia as well. And I think to inspire the students, I think EWB and the work you do is really inspiring. You know, your name's Engineers Without Borders. Being able to take your skill set overseas and work with those that need it most is something that is inspiring for all. I think the amount of hands that are raised in my class when I ask who's heard of Sustainable Development Goals, everyone's hands shoot up. You know, you guys know the challenges, you guys know the world that you're inheriting. Making that change and making that difference is something that you will play. And as engineers, you bring an incredibly useful skill, set of skills to apply to these problems.
Yes, definitely. Like seeing all of the changes on the news, like every day, it's like really, it's really shocking, like how much there is that you could work on.
Yeah.
I think that ends it. I'll let John do a conclusion.
Yeah, so that concludes today's podcast. So thank you for joining us today, Andrew. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Muskan, for having me very much. Always a pleasure to interact with EWB. You guys do such great work and have such a huge cohort of members. I'm here if you have any questions, any of the listeners, or want to follow up on anything, please do reach out. Thank you very much for having me.
So with the students, you can also watch the previous podcast with Andrew on YouTube or Spotify under EWB UNSW. And thank you so much for tuning in for this episode with us at EWB. And we hope you all look forward to our upcoming podcast for this year. Yep. See you guys next time.
Bye.
Bye.